I see you found our little hiding spot in the universe. Don't get too comfortable. This is a place where you will find those with an experience that's out of this world, or possibly deep within your life. I welcome you to the Oracles with James Tyson. Lean forward and listen. We will pull you into a supernatural journey with guests from around the world, each one experiencing some of the most extraordinary phenomena this wee planet has to offer. Now, here are the Oracles with James Tyson.
Thank you, Liam. Hey, and thank you, listener and viewer, for tuning in to today's episode of the Oracles with James Tyson. It's me, James. And today we're heading to a little brick house built in the 1800s in the corner of Baltimore and Breckenridge Streets in a town you may know as Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. And we're going to poke around a bit in that town with a fellow that used to be, well, he's retired. He was a U.S. park ranger and actually worked in the park, which is now the Gettysburg, or which is now a park, was the famous Battle of Gettysburg Battlefield. And very interesting man, Mr. Mark Nesbitt. He is a historian. He is a paranormal investigation, all in his own. He's a paranormal investigation. He's a paranormal investigator, and he is an author and owns that little red brick building down on Baltimore Street, which is kind of cool. He calls it his, it's like a laboratory for paranormal. And it's good when you own a piece of history, American history, that close to a battlefield, and you're a paranormal investigator in one of the most active haunted locations around. And we're going to talk about that. He is also, as I said, an author, and you can tell by the books over my left shoulder here. And yeah, that is a cannon over my shoulder pointing at my head. But yeah, these are his books. We're going to talk about the Civil War Ghost Trials book. We're going to trails. And we're going to talk about a bit about a book on crime scene paranormal investigation called Blood and Ghosts, and of course his series Ghosts of Gettysburg, which is actually up to volume 9 now. And you can get those if you go to his website, which is ghostsofgettysburg.com. Again, ghostsofgettysburg.com. They have the Ghosts of Gettysburg tours out of that location. So please, if you're down in the area, and you have to, if you're an American and you're interested in history, you should go there anyway. If you're an American and you're interested in history and you're watching this podcast, then you like paranormal stuff. So you got to go anyway. So check out his ghost tours. And I know that the whole apocalypse thing is throwing a monkey wrench into groups, but we talk about that because smaller groups doing it, they still do them. So take your pod out, your family out, and they've got it all set up for that. It's outdoors most of the time. Inside, obviously, it's going to be a little bit, setting stuff up, and they'll move stuff around and then make it smaller for smaller groups. But what a great idea he and his wife Carol had years ago about getting an app where you could just follow along the tour. And it actually, before COVID shutdown hit, the app came out, and you can get a paranormal tour of Gettysburg on the app. And you can also, the same company has a regular historic tour of Gettysburg. So you can get that through the website. Again, that's the ghostsofgettysburg.com. And yeah, go there, check out the stuff that Mark has. And what's really cool, when I was in Gettysburg back in the day, not the 1800s, but back about 3-4 years ago, looking through the window, because it was closed, of his shop, he's got pictures on the walls of photographs that tourists had sent him over the years where they're getting their picture taken with their family, and then there'd be the fuzzy thing in the background wearing a Confederate or Union uniform. So he's got a great collection of that. Most of that stuff is popped out in books, specifically the Ghosts of Gettysburg series. Again, it's up to book 9 now, and you can get those on the website, the ghostsofgettysburg.com, or you can go to Amazon, whichever you feel more comfortable with. But remember, if you get it from the website, his website, the money goes to him and not 75% or more to Amazon. Shh, don't let that too publicly known. But yeah, you can get the books from him too. And there's other T-shirts and things you can get on his store online there. But yeah, Mark is a very, very cool guy. And I talked to him a few years ago. Unfortunately, my show was a live show from 9 till midnight. So it was like midnight till 3 a.m. for him to stay up and talk. So this one was a little bit easier. And he's a great guy. He and Carol run this business out of Gettysburg. Very, very knowledgeable man, not only on the history of that battle and that area, but the paranormal. And we talk about stories that he's relayed from tourists that have walked up to him who've had encounters with full-on apparitions on the battlefield, as well as his stories of his paranormal investigations that he and his team has conducted in the area, and the old barns that were used as Confederate field hospitals and things like that. So you guys wait here. I'm going to try to dodge the cannon beside my head here, and I'm going to go out and go get Mark. See you in a bit. Mark, how are you today?
James, I'm doing well. Thank you.
Thank you for dropping by. I haven't been to Gettysburg since about 2017. Last time I talked to you was probably 2016, and that was on a live 3-hour internet radio show we had back then. So I would have kept you up really late. I think it started at 9 p.m. and went till midnight Pacific time. So
this is that was you. Oh.
Oh, that was you.
I remember that.
Oh, geez. Yeah, that was me. So it's a little bit less tired right now, but
Right.
Really appreciate you coming back on. And the reason I looked you up again is that I was talking to a fella in Pennsylvania who does a podcast, Jim Mallard, and he's got a podcast out there for the last 10 plus years. And we were talking about Gettysburg, and I said, "Oh, you've got to go out when you go to Gettysburg. You've got to go into Mark's store because he's got pictures on the walls of that tourists have taken where they've got the shadows in the background and things like that." So he says, "Mark who?" And I said, "Mark Nesbitt. You've got to get a hold of him." So we were exchanging your information, and I thought, damn it, I got to get a hold of Mark too. I haven't talked to you forever. Yeah, it's good. I when I was out there, unfortunately, I missed bumping into you. I was only out there for the weekend, I think. Yeah, probably about 3 days max. But
and you said there was a conference there at the time too, so
yeah, there was a ghost conference downtown, but which isn't bad for like us on the west coast of Canada here. Leaving out of Seattle, I think my return airfare was $525 to Harrisburg. So
that's not bad.
It's almost cheaper than, well, it's a little bit more than going to LA, but like heck, while you're there, go to Pennsylvania, go to Gettysburg, and you're a few hours away from the Smithsonian. So make a good trip of it. Yeah. You seem to be a bit of a prolific writer, young man, but I know before you retired, you were working actually as a at the battlefield, weren't you not?
Well, I was early in my career. When I first moved to Gettysburg, I moved here to work as a park ranger. And I spent 5 or 6 years as a park ranger in Gettysburg, and that's what kind of got me started on collecting the ghost stories of Gettysburg. Being the bachelor, I was moved around and lived in several of the historic buildings out on the park. They do that for security purposes. They put a ranger in the historic houses, and I lived in 4 of them, and had what back then I called unexplainable experiences in every one of them. And later on, then I found out that other people had exactly the same experience. Door that wouldn't stay shut in the Weichert house. Babies crying in the cemetery lodge. Person before me had heard that as well. So the wheels started turning, and I started thinking there's a little something more to this place Gettysburg than just the history of it, And so the first book, which took about 10 years after that to put together, the very first book was an historian collecting the folklore of the battlefield and putting the history and the folklore together. It was probably about the fourth or fifth book when I went on my very first paranormal investigation on the battlefield. So after about the fourth book, I started getting into that a little bit more, the personal experiences, and more and more people, once the books got out, started writing to me with their experiences. There's someone just wrote to me last week with their experiences. So I still get letters. So I'm up to finish book number 8, and I am working on 9, just the ghost books. I have several history books out as well. And hopefully I'll get a 9th one out before I become a ghost.
Maybe just be a ghostwriter after that.
Well, that could be.
Well, the history books, would those be like the Cursed Pennsylvania and Cursed Virginia, or is that, those are ghost ones too?
Those are paranormal,
Paranormal-ish,
strange people, places, things in Virginia and Pennsylvania that appear to be cursed. The history books I'm talking about would be 35 Days to Gettysburg, where I take 2 unpublished diaries, one Union, one Confederate, and I put their day by day experiences together side by side, so you can actually read what each one's doing on that particular day as they're on a collision course towards Gettysburg. I wrote a book called Rebel Rivers about the rivers in Virginia that were used by, ironically, the Union Army to defeat the Confederacy. I wrote a book called Through Blood and Fire about Joshua Chamberlain, the famous commander on Little Round Top there. And I wrote a book called Saber and Scapegoat, which is a defense of Jeb Stuart in the Gettysburg campaign. Everybody blamed him for the defeat at Gettysburg, and I defended him. So those are basically my history books. And then my paranormal books would be the Gettysburg Ghost books, and then I also did a couple of books with Catherine Ramsland, who is a professor of forensics at DeSales University, and they're part of a series, Haunted Crime Scene series.
Yes, I saw that.
Yeah, and those are pretty interesting. If you like, it's kind of like Ghost Hunters meet CSI. If you want to.
Which is kind of cool, because I was, and I don't remember, you may not remember this, but I was a member of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police for 28 years. And I've seen ghosts basically all my life, except for that 28-year period I was a policeman, that it was like it was turned down. I probably I got pushed by one in an old asylum area not too far from where I live now, and I saw one standing outside a car in a car accident.
Oh wow. That was it.
But I'd gone to death like sudden, go check on my Uncle Bob. I haven't talked to him for a long time, and you get there and Uncle Bob's passed, but I had feelings waiting for body removal as I'm doing my investigation. And I always joke about it. Well, joke in hindsight, I would be talking, I'd be all by myself, but talking to the body on why I'm doing things and documenting the scene. And then there's other ones I wouldn't talk to. And a couple of psychic friends are going, yeah, it's because you actually had knowledge that the spirit was still there. You felt him still there. So you talked to him to make him comfortable while you're going through his drawers and writing down all the medication that was on the shelf and taking photographs of the scene, which I needed for the medical examiner. But that was turned off. But I could imagine somebody going in who's like very, very intuitive, very I wasn't completely switched on. I think that part of me was kind of turned down during that career for that reason, that I wasn't seeing that stuff. But I can imagine somebody coming into a crime scene that was active with dead people who was actually turned on a bit. And like the guy standing there pointing at the knife and pointing at the bad guy and stuff like that. Yeah. But you're when you guys were doing the crime scene one, kind of take me through an example of what type of haunted crime scenes you were dealing with, and what was interesting about that.
Well, the one that I was directly involved in, my Catherine's part of it was the crime. My part of it was attempting to get more information through the paranormal methods, ghost hunting, in other words, talking to the victims or deceased observers, witnesses. And the one that I was that kind of got this all kicked off was a fellow who was murdered. They called it a suicide in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, in the Hotel Bethlehem. There was a man that was, of course, this was during celebrations and fireworks, so no one heard the shot. But he was found inside like a bathroom, and he was up against the door, and he was shot in the head, but he was also shot in the leg. He was wounded twice. And I asked Catherine, this is kind of strange, isn't it, for a suicide to be shot twice? She says, not really. It's not as rare as you would think. But he was leaning against the door. So how does that happen? Well, that could happen too, I guess. But I got in touch with him using EVP. And we were in the very room that he was killed in or committed suicide in. And I asked him, I said, did you kill yourself, or were you murdered? And of course, there's silence when I'm recording. When I played it back, I got two syllables, and they both ended with murder is the way I interpreted it. So we got some of that information to the local coroner, and he was interested enough that he thought he was going to reopen the case. So, because if they get more information on a murder, they're never really closed.
Yeah,
they will continue. So that's the type of thing that we thought could be used. Now, it's not, as you know, it's not admissible, at least in the United States courts, as evidence because it's called spectral evidence.
Yeah.
And only a couple of times has it been allowed in our history. And that's from the Salem witch trials. But I asked, we were working with an former FBI profiler, and I asked him, I said, if you were stuck in a case and you got this information from this kind of a source, would you follow up on it? He said, absolutely.
Absolutely, yeah.
We'll do anything to solve a case. And so that was, that was kind of encouragement that we were on the right track. And so we basically, what the books do is in some cases we've done investigations, paranormal investigations, to add to the body of evidence to keep the investigation going. Catherine was talking to someone, she was pitching this to a production company out in Hollywood. And they said, oh, that's great. So you're going to go to all these places and get the ghost to solve the case, right? And we're like, no, that's not how that works. What we do is we get more information for the living detectives to continue the case. So that's, it's kind of interesting. They're kind of fun. And if you like true crime, the paranormal, it's a good combination.
Yeah, I had the opportunity back in the day to interview most of the psychics who were in the series Psychic Detective. And they had a history of working with the FBI or working with police, or in some cases the military, in locating things, doing remote viewing and things like that. And and there was one of the ladies, actually, her case in Louisiana. She's from California, psychic, and sorry, I can't remember her name, but there was a murder in Louisiana. A guy went missing in his truck, and the family were distraught, didn't know what to do. And one of the family members saying, well, there's a psychic I know, we'll phone her in California. So she phones, and the psychic says, get on whatever highway right now. Just get out on the highway. You've got to be on this highway right now. Start driving south. So they went, okay, fine, do what the psychic says. Sure enough, there's their brother's truck. So they follow it. They realize it's not, there's a couple of people in it. It's not their brother. And they just keep following it. And then it goes down a dark dirt road and dead end with nobody on it. It does a U-turn at the back and he gets scared because he's being followed by all these cars, takes off, and out of nowhere, there happened to be a police car parked down the road. They're honking, they pull the guy over. Sure enough, and it was a couple in there that took their brother, wanted to know what it was like to kill somebody. They killed him. So goes to trial. And of course, the prosecutor, the DA says, well, we've got to get the story on how you got, why you got out on the highway and how you knew the truck was there. And they all went, psychic in California. So psychic in California was the first witness on the trial in Louisiana.
Wow,
and it was the first time that a psychic actually came on and said, yeah, they phoned me. I got an image of this. I told them that. Then they take over from them. She told us, we got on the road, saw the truck, and then the rest, crime solving history. But yeah, that was really interesting. And other ones, Marianne Rodriguez, she's one of these people that when someone dies, they show up at the foot of her bed and say, hey, I'm dead and my body I got killed. I'm in a marsh 10 miles out of town. Could you help me out here? She's like, okay, what do I do now? Yeah, well, it's fascinating. Those people that they're actually almost like a ghost magnet. They, the dead come to them knowing that they have that connection.
Well, we've done weekends with people who have gone to other weekends that we've done to teach them how to do paranormal investigating, and did actually 3 different crimes over the course of a couple of years. And they are using all the techniques that they learned: dowsing rods, asking questions, pendulums, remote viewing. We do a lot of stuff that's intuition forward. In other words, help the people to be more sensitive to their own abilities, and from there move on. In other words, use the equipment just to kind of back it up. So and we've done a number of these things. And one of the things that we've been working on, one of the weekends that we did was the famous Jim Williams, Danny Hansford down in Savannah, the basis for the book Midnight in the Garden of Good and Evil, and and the movie as well. And that was very interesting because we went down there personally to actually do investigations down there at Danny Hansford's grave and outside the house that he was killed in. And but what we discovered is you really don't have to go to these places. You can contact the ghosts, and there is no more appropriate place to do that than Gettysburg. And we'll put them in a haunted B&B in Gettysburg, the people, and then we'll start to contact these ghosts, and have been successful every time in gaining more information on the crime to keep the investigation going.
Yeah. The furtherance in the investigation is needed. And as a policeman, I'm trying to think how I would write that up into, like, if I needed a search warrant. Confidential source provided me with information on this date to it. Yeah, it is interesting how you can take, and of course it's very seldom, my body is behind the dumpster at this address, the knife is over here, and the bad guy lives at this address. Like, it's always a little bit vague, and it's a little bit out there. Marianne Morgan, a psychic investigator, I think it was maybe it wasn't Marianne's, but there was a fellow in Canada who was a woman, a young girl, was out for rent or something. She was murdered, and the psychic gave, this is what the guy's going to look like when he's arrested, and the police did a composite drawing, and she said, that's what he's going to look like when he's arrested. And they said, oh, we'll go look for him. And she says, no, you've already spoken to him, and he won't be arrested for 10 years. He doesn't look like that now. Well, then the police are going, well, I want to go and arrest him because he murdered this girl. I said, No, it's not your time. He'll be found by somebody, or she'll be found, or he'll be arrested by somebody, and it's in their path, energetic path, to be the one to solve and arrest the guy. Your path is to do this part of the investigation. So don't worry about it. Sure enough, 10 years later, they arrest him. He looks exactly like the composite drawing. And they did talk to him. He was like a 17-year-old kid. And he lived about a block and a half away from where the body was found. But because he was a 17-year-old kid, they just breezed right past it on the investigation. But it was kind of weird that, you know, in the great scheme of things, the psychic knew that this wasn't going to happen at this time. Oh, Marianne Morgan's was a rich lady in Nevada. Her sister-in-law or sister killed her or something. And she told the police, oh, she'll be found. I see the body. It's by a one-story blue building, kind of decrepit building. And it's one of those kids' merry-go-rounds, little things you spin on in the playground. And she's right beside that. Oh, we'll go look for the building. And she said, no, you're not going to find her. She's going to be found by somebody, a couple out for a walk. Sure enough, about 5 years later, couple's out for a walk. They get tired. They sit down, and the lady sits down on her skull.
Oh, wow.
Calls the police. They get there, and it's in behind an old blue motel, and it's in the play area out back. Exactly the crime scene that was described earlier, years earlier. And it's in the file. So when they found her, they went, oh, it matched. But it wasn't their time. It wasn't in the investigator's path to be the ones to actually find the body. It was the couple out for a walk. It was in their path. And then it was somehow they had to intersect finding the body. So it was really fascinating when you start looking into the crime scene stuff and again, helping police. So you may not get, this guy did it on this date. It might be just all shadows because you aren't supposed to find the body yet, or you're not supposed to solve it yet.
Right. And how mediums or psychics would know that is fascinating to me, because I am not sensitive at all. Okay. I'm like a psychic brick, you know. I have no sensitivity whatsoever.
Oh, well, do you know you're dreaming? Hold that thought. But do you know you're dreaming when you're dreaming?
Sometimes, yeah.
Okay, that's a dictionary definition of a lucid dream.
Oh, okay.
Only higher vibration or intuitive or empaths do that. Also, do you wake up between 3 and 4:30 in the morning?
I used to.
Yeah, mostly when you were a kid.
Yeah, or a few years ago, I was waking up at 3:33.
Yeah. Do you ever see shadows in your room when you woke up?
No.
That you remember? Okay, because that's an empath thing too.
Yeah.
That's the veil thinning, and they're all the dead people you've brought home with you are going, hey, Mark.
Yeah.
I'm trying to get your attention all day, but now I got you. It's like, okay, you can get out of my room now. Yeah, but that knowing you're dreaming when you're dreaming, that's a clue.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, it could be that I'm developing a little more sensitivity as well. You know, they call it the gift, but the mediums that I've known, I don't know if it's a gift. I know one, Rob Conover, who sadly just passed not too long ago, within the last year, was a psychic from the Midwest, and he had been on TV several times. He'd never been to Gettysburg. And so he came out with a very good friend of ours who was also a paranormal investigator. And I wanted to take him on a battlefield tour. And we got to the first day's battlefield, the opening of the battle. And I was talking to him about where we were and what was happening and this and that. And he's normally a talkative guy. He didn't say a word. And after about 5 minutes, I said, Rob, are you all right? He goes, no. I said, do you want to get out of here? He says, yeah, I can't. I'm seeing everything. So we got him out of there, and he didn't want to go back again. He'd never been there, traveled 12, 14 hours to get to Gettysburg, and that was it.
Yeah, that would be an overwhelming experience for somebody.
Oh, yeah, and it happens to a lot of mediums that I've known. Patty Wilson, who was another good friend and a gifted medium, we took her to Spotsylvania, which is a battlefield down in Virginia.
Oh, okay.
near Fredericksburg. Spotsylvania, they fought at a place called the Bloody Angle for 22 hours straight in the pouring rain, and in 1864. And in fact, one participant who had been with the 24th Michigan in Gettysburg, and at Gettysburg they were decimated. At Gettysburg, they were not the same unit after. He fought in Spotsylvania, and he said Gettysburg was a skirmish compared.
Didn't have to deal with it. I dealt with what I had to do at the time, but not have to deal with the woo-woo stuff going on around it.
Mm-hmm.
So,
probably good. Yeah, probably good.
yeah, that was bizarre. Now, Mark, if someone wants to look a little bit more with Mark Nesbitt, you can go to ghostsofgettysburg.com. Again, ghostsofgettysburg.com, and you'll see that Mark actually has a bunch of ghost tours that they put on. You're not doing it right now during the apocalypse, are you? Or you're
Actually, we didn't do it at the beginning of this past summer, the spring and the summer.
Yeah.
Mainly because there wasn't anybody in Gettysburg. It was the scariest thing I've ever seen. Because Gettysburg is from March all the way through November. I mean, there's almost every weekend you can go out there and watch crowds of people going up and down the streets. And this year it was just absolutely no one came to Gettysburg. We lost about $35,000 worth of business from tour groups right off the bat, right in the beginning. And then it didn't get any better until October. October was like, well, actually it was a better October than we've had in 5 years. Oh. So everybody just, I guess, decided that's it. We've had it. We're getting out of our homes. We're going to Gettysburg. And so, but we've done some things to kind of adapt to that. One of the things we're offering now is private tours. In other words, a lot of people are still afraid. They don't want to. Well, first of all, our tours were safe. Okay, virtually 99% of the started doing that. The other thing we've done is we created, and this has been in my and Carol's minds for a couple of years now. We created an app.
Yes, brilliant.
Of the Battlefield tour. I've had a Battlefield ghost tour for 10 years written down, but we never got a chance to actually do. In fact, we actually recorded it and put it on a DVD or made it into a download, but really wasn't going very well because it didn't have any visuals with it. You had to be on the battlefield to enjoy it. The app is you can enjoy it from anywhere because it's full of pictures. It's there maps. There's all kinds of graphics in there that you can enjoy. A tour of the Gettysburg Battlefield from your own computer, but you can, once again, you can get it from ghostsofgettysburg.com. There's a link there. Or you can take it out on the battlefield and listen to the stories and go to the different sites and stop and get out of your car, walk around, come back, start it up again.
So that's what I think would be the greatest thing to do, is just have that thing in your ears and do the walk and and follow the app information as you're walking through it.
Yeah, and the same company also has an app for the actual historic tour. So you can get both of them, as a matter of fact, for a discount price on one of them from that site that we have on ghostsofgettysburg.com. Okay,
I'm gonna have to take a breeze past that one. I got we're talking a little bit off air here about a fellow who's got a paranormal podcast in Pennsylvania, a fellow named Jim Mallard on the Mallard Report. And when I was interviewing him the other day, he related a story from Devil's Den when he was a kid and saw a soldier, a reenactor, which tweaked a story that you told me about a fellow seeing a bunch of reenactors and they thought they were really well dressed and in real period costume, not like new ones and things. And they came to you to talk about it when you were a park ranger, and you said, "Yeah, there's no reenactors there." They look back and yeah, they're gone. But this Jim Mallard had the same experience with this soldier. He followed him around a corner and he disappeared. And I said,
Yeah.
"Oh, you can." Mark Nesbitt's got stories. Do you have? What are some of the ones that really stand out in your mind from tourists on the battlefield that that either came to you or even showed you photographs of, like, here's Billy and her dad standing by whatever, and there's two soldiers in the background, photobombing them.
Well, I get, like I said, I get stories in the mail or online email quite a bit. What really fascinates me now, and I have a whole chapter in Ghosts of Gettysburg 8 called Deja Vu. What I realized, is I'm starting to get now, after I've been doing this for 20 some years, stories that I've heard before. Same venue, same story, whole different set of people.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and this actually started, there was a house in Gettysburg, and we call the Passmore House because of the lady who lived there, who became one of my guides. At any rate, she had some interesting stories about, they rented it out to college girls, and they for a couple of years they were getting weird stories. They did a
Sorry about that, Mark. We had a technical glitch. Just before that, we were talking about some stories that really stick out in mind, and you were talking about was it the Passmore House or
Passmore House? Yeah. Uh, the Passmore House originally was a tour guide of mine who owned it, and she said that she'd had some experiences there with the college students, the females that she rented it to, and they came. I interviewed them, and they came up with some stories that were very, very strange. Not the least of which was hearing footsteps coming down the hall. One woman was lying in bed at night, and her door was open, and slowly the door closed, and she got up and looked, and no one was behind the door. Maybe the scariest thing was they heard a body, or a human being like body, fall down the stairs, and they all, in the middle of the night, they all ran out to see who had fallen down the stairs, and no one was at the bottom of the stairs. One other thing they did is they trying to find out maybe who was closing the door or helping them. They did a Ouija board, and they got the name Joanna Craig. Couple months later, the owner of the house was digging a foundation, pulled out this real solid stone and just threw it. It was a heavy stone, probably 80 pounds, and he threw it. It landed, and where the way it landed on the top of it is the name Joanna Craig.
Jeez.
Who she was, where she went, nobody knows. At any rate, 2 years ago, I got a phone call from a young lady, a college senior, who said, "Can you come out and do an investigation of our house? We're living here, and we're hearing all kinds of strange things." I said, "Where do you live?" And she gave me the address of the Passmore House. Now, who can pass that up? So I went, and Carol and a medium friend of ours and I went and did an investigation there. And they started telling us stories about hearing footsteps up and down the halls, doors opening and closing on their own, and the sound of a body falling down the inside stairs. So that got me thinking, I wonder how many of these stories I'm getting repeats of. Same venue, same story, whole different people years later. So I started collecting some more stories and realized that I was getting more. And the story you mentioned about Devil's Den reminded me of one of the first stories I'd ever heard was of a I was a park ranger, and a woman came into the visitor center early in the morning, and she said, "Are there any ghosts here at Gettysburg?" And we all kind of looked at each other like, "Well, we're not really supposed to talk about that, according to our bosses." "Why? What happened?" She said, "I was out at Devil's Den, and I was looking around and kind of got it was 6 o'clock in the morning. So I got out of my car, was looking around, got up on top of the rocks. I could see all around, and I decided to take a picture. I had my camera up to my face. All of a sudden, I got this feeling that I wasn't alone. So I turned around, and there was a man standing there, and he said, "What you're looking for is over there." And she said, I turned around again, but I said, "How's he know what I'm looking for?" And she turned back, and he was gone, and there was no place for him to go. So we asked her, "What did he look like?" And she said, "Well, he was ragged. He was like a kind of like a hippie, floppy hat, barefoot, ragged clothes." Well, she didn't realize it, but she described a soldier from Texas. Soldiers from Texas, being far away from home, being Confederates, they couldn't rely on their government to provide them with uniforms. So they would either get them off the dead, or they would get them from home, and it would take forever. But they kind of had this pride about being kind of ragged. So she described as Texas soldier, and the Texas soldiers were the ones who were most associated with taking Devil's Den. Now, fast forward to just a couple of years ago. This was back in the 70s when I heard this first story. Fast forward to just a couple of years ago. I'm doing an autographing, and a woman came up to me and she said, I had an experience in Devil's Den, and I don't know if you'd like to hear about it or not. I said, sure. She said, well, I was standing there, and all of a sudden, she said, I was kind of looking at the flowers, and I looked up, and there was a man standing right in front of me. I said, yeah, what did he look like? She said, well, he had a floppy hat. And I said, stop right there. You read my book, right? She goes, no, this is the first time I've seen him. I said, keep going. She virtually described the same guy, barefoot, ragged clothes, floppy hat, shoulder-length hair. And he said, he looked at me, and he pointed at my sweatshirt, and he said, First Texas. She said, and I looked down, and sure enough, I had my University of Texas sweatshirt on. It said Texas across it, and I looked up, and he was gone. She said he wasn't 3 feet from me, and he just disappeared. And I have another account of someone seeing this same guy in Devil's Den. Now, if we're obviously part of the scientific method is to be able to reproduce experiments, one after another. Well, we can't do that with the business we're in, because the ghosts sometimes cooperate and sometimes they don't. But when I start collecting stories like this that seem to be, they're apocryphal, or anecdotal, I should say, but when they start to have patterns like that, that's what really interests me in saying that this is a real thing. Okay, people are seeing this. Okay, they're not making it up. Another thing that I like, for example, because I think you were starting to talk about this one story. It's one of the more the stories that it repeats itself over and over. I have at least half a dozen accounts of the Phantom Regiment. Okay, it's a group of soldiers that people will see marching around in the fields out there, and they'll watch them for a while, and they think they're reenactors. They think they're getting ready, to go into a mock battle, and all of a sudden they disappear. A woman and her son, a woman wrote to me, a woman and her son and the family dog, and the dog's important in this story, were going out on the battlefield first thing in the morning, and they came out to the peach orchards and turned towards the wheat field, and they just gotten to the top of that little hill, and they looked down, and there was a group of soldiers maneuvering out in the field. The dog in the back seat saw them and was growling. And they maneuvered a little bit longer. All of a sudden, a couple came jogging up the road, and this whole line of soldiers just disappeared. And the dog stopped growling. Now, the dog is important because as human beings, when we see something like that and then see it vanish, we have a lot of baggage. We don't want to believe it. We're saying it couldn't have happened. Maybe I had a little too much to drink last night, a little residual hangover, or maybe it's something under my contacts or whatever. But the dog is just alert. They don't have to rationalize why they're seeing something or whether it makes sense or not. All they're worried about is I have to protect my peeps, you know? So the dog is very important in that. And I have a number of accounts of animals seeing strange things, but this is the first one that I have where both the humans and the dog saw the same thing. And it's that Phantom Regiment that many, many, many people have seen.
Now, do you guys have reenactors on that field ever?
Oh, oh, yeah. Well, yeah, there'll be reenactors. However, they're usually not maneuvering. Okay, they're not allowed. I mean, they can visit the battlefield like everybody else. Usually, they're in pairs or two or
Yeah.
three, unless they're going. I haven't seen a group of reenactors marching down the road probably 15 years because uh, they usually stay in their campsites or they'll come into town for in a group where they're organized and everything. Usually you don't see them out on the battlefield. Every once in a while you'll see one out there, and of course they're onto the ghost thing now.
Yeah.
So, so they'll stand there and then they'll hide behind a tree. And people will be, I should have gotten a picture of him.
Yeah. I'll run something by you, and you might be able to fill me in on this one. When I was out there in 2017, it was a Sunday around 11 o'clock in the morning. And you're familiar with where there's like a lot of monuments to the different units. I can't remember. It's a rise, and it's not a cemetery per se. But it's got a lot of the units and obelisks and things there.
Is it across from the cemetery? It kind of sounds like East Cemetery Hill.
Yeah. Okay. I think that's what it was. And we walked west, and then it gets down into the fields again.
Yeah, that's not East Cemetery.
Okay.
But it might be Little Round Top. That's one spot.
That could be it then. But
yeah.
I was with one of the listeners that used to have my live show, came to the paranormal conference too. She came down from New York, and we were standing there, and it was like beautiful day. Well, beautiful day. It was quiet. There wasn't a lot of people around, and it was pretty early. And we heard the report of two cannons. It was like boom, echo, echo, boom. And like, I know what a small, like a 6-8 pounder cannon sounds like, because we used to have them at the Royal Canadian Mounted Police Academy where I was. They'd fire them off at sunset in the sunset parade. So I'm kind of familiar with a cannon and the sound of it going after. You guys don't have cannons going off anywhere around Gettysburg, do you?
Every once in a while, there's and I don't know if that weekend they had any or not. I can possibly check, but they will have an artillery demonstration where they bring in reenactors, okay, and fire off. And if this was in the summertime,
yeah, it must have been because it was ticks.
Yeah.
So.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. So it may have been a reenactor group. They don't have them frequently, but they do have them in the summertime. However, that being said, I have gotten reports of people, especially at East Cemetery Hill, they'll hear from the woods in the distance.
Yeah, this was quite a ways away from us.
Yeah, or a men cheering, whole horde of men cheering, or cannons. It has been heard, in other words, and there's no explanation for it. Especially if it's in the fall or late fall or early spring. Summertime is, we do get a lot of reenactors, and the Park Service does put on presentations. So that, I'm always looking for a logical explanation for this stuff rather than paranormal, but that could be.
Okay. So there could be a chance, because they didn't even sound like they were coming from within the battlefield. They sounded like they were coming like from the other side of the battlefield. He says he wasn't aware of any cannon stuff, but he wasn't like, that's not part of his you know, he wasn't in that loop kind of whether there were reenactors or anything, but so I just kind of wrote it off. And I just thought about it now when you're talking about, you know, stuff people had bumped into.
Well, that's interesting because maybe there now I'm thinking maybe there weren't any reenactors because park ranger's job is to know what's going on in the park that day.
For the full park, yeah.
Yeah.
You'd probably come to work and get a list of events.
Well, yeah, we hear about it or
security
we
purposes, yeah.
Yeah, sure. So that's interesting.
Yeah, so that was we just kind of wrote it off as well. Excuse me, I definitely heard cannon, because it wasn't anything else other than a old cannon, and it was boom, and then there's that, you know, if you've heard cannons going, there's kind of a weird concussion kind of sound after, and then it happened again. So it was and one was really loud, and then one was not as loud, and it wasn't an echo of the first one. It was those echoes kind of just faded off. Excuse me.
Well, the guns are usually side by side. You'll fire one and then they'll fire another one. Although the last time I saw it, they just used one gun. So, you know, because it's easier to see the how they loaded and fired, which is you're concentrating on one gun. So I don't know. That's
yeah. It was interesting. There's always, we were talking about the Passmore house and the guy falling down the stairs, and hearing that story through multiple people. Well, there's and you're familiar with this because you do the ghost stuff, but the residual energy versus like ghost energy, residual energy kind of being on a loop, that
right.
It'll, you know, it's the same thing that people will hear at a certain time or a certain weather permitting or whatever it causes that loop to go. And there was always this famous, I shouldn't say always, there's a famous video of a soldier. They say it's a ghost of a soldier running from one tree to another in Gettysburg and then disappearing, but he's on a loop. Are you familiar with that one?
I've seen a lot of those, and the most recent one, there was someone coming from behind. It seemed like there was someone coming from behind a cannon, and they moved.
Okay.
So I've seen a number of them. I
Yeah.
think we kind of debunked that one though, because somebody said that it was looked like a droplet on the windscreen, on the windshield.
Oh, okay.
But they didn't have the windshield wipers going, you know. So I don't know if it was raining or not. You try and explain these things, and sometimes you get as bad as a true believer.
Yeah.
You know, people are convinced what they saw, and people that are trying to debunk them really go out of their way. So I'd have to see it again.
I have to find that one, because I think that literally is it may have been somebody, a kid, 16-year-old, 17-year-old soldier running from tree A to tree B, absolutely terrified and leaving an imprint.
Yeah.
And he could have died that day or lived to a happy old age. But at that point, running from there to there, that energy just imprinted, and it's, you know, it seems like it's been recorded by a number of people at the same location.
Yeah. I'll have to, if you would, I'd like to see it, because
I gotta
make a note. That doesn't ring a bell, but I've seen so many that, you know, but that's one of the theories. You know, we get both intelligent hauntings, which would be the soldier that said, you know, what you're looking for is over there, or perhaps the same one who said First Texas to that woman. And then the residual hauntings, which would be the Phantom Regiment, where they act like you don't even exist. You know, you're not even part of their world, which would be that Phantom Regiment thing. And we're still trying to figure out, is there a scientific explanation for all this? It's got to be energy, because that's what everything is. Everything that we see, you know, everything from not just electrical energy, but I mean, we are frozen energy, according to science. But the possibility is there that there might be a geology effect. It's called some people call the stone recorder theory, that the energy of these men was imprinted on the stones there. And at first I thought this was kind of crazy. Doesn't make sense. First of all, you need a burst of energy from these. Well, of course, I realized that, yeah, there's a lot of energy when you're in combat, and
Yeah.
above and beyond normal. The other thing I found out, they'd done some research in the old Soviet Union when they could experiment on dying people. And one Polish scientist discovered that at the moment of death, there is a burst of photons from our body. He called it a light shout, and it's 1,000 times more than what we give off normally. So it's huge at the moment of death. We also realize that when bones are broken, they give off a piezoelectric burst. How many times were bones broken? 51,000 casualties. You know, they're getting hit all the time. Now, what about the stone recorder? Well, most of the stuff in Gettysburg, most of the stone that you see is granite, and granite is full of quartz.
Yeah.
And quartz vibrates to electrical impulses, because that's been going on since quartz watches for 60 years now, 70 years. And so maybe, and of course, how are we communicating? Using silicon, right?
Yeah.
Quartz basic chip. So this all started to fall into place. And I'm thinking, this is pretty interesting. Now all we have to do is figure out what it is that flips the switch to release this energy from the quartz at Gettysburg, and then we could study it at will. So I don't know. I need somebody a little bit smarter in physics, I think.
And here's one of the things that we talk about a lot with my crew and things, and where I've traveled, and I've been lucky enough to talk to people who investigate this kind of thing, is that this ghost itself, the dead person, and I don't mean the dead person that has left the meat sack and gone on, we'll call it crossed over and come back in spirit, but the one that's not moved, the one that's for some reason is still hanging out. They have to access energy of some sort to be able to communicate, to be able to be seen, to move things, to throw something off a table. We look at places out where I live here in the Pacific Northwest. The Pacific Ocean squeezes in between this area called the Olympic Peninsula in Washington State and the tip of Vancouver Island twice a day. The tide comes through in a narrow gap, huge amount of energy being generated. And people would say, well, Victoria, British Columbia, on the tip of Vancouver Island, one of the most haunted places in North America. Not really. It's got as many dead people as everywhere else has. Probably a lot fewer than the eastern side of the continent, where people have been there's a larger volume of population. But you can sure see ghosts there. Same along the coast of that part of Washington State. Anywhere you're near a river, anywhere where a railway track crosses a river and then kind of goes into a railway station. Why is this more haunted than down the pub down the road kind of thing? Tombstone, Arizona, a great example. It's literally, the town is on top of silver mines. The whole, you stick your hand in the ground, you come up with a handful of quartz. It's all crystal underneath that place, and solar loading from the sun. My friend Nora Weed, she runs Watt and Tarbell. It's the last of the 4 undertakers from the 1800s that is there, and she's psychic. So I asked her, I said, so what do you see when you look out the door? You a bunch of cowboys, ghosts? And she goes, yeah, and people from last Thursday. It's just that it just draws, they can just take the energy from the ground. She actually had a box of 9mm ammunition on a table, and it got thrown off the table against a wall by something. So that's a lot of energy to draw. Gold mines, they usually have a water source, and there's going to be a lot of crystal, a lot of quartz in the ground. So why are old ghost towns ghost towns? perceived to be more haunted than, you know, the fishing. Well, I guess the fishing place would, because of the water. The Queen Mary. Why is that so haunted? You know, where do they get the energy? Well, you've got tidal water moving under a metal boat.
Right.
Yeah, it's amazing. And if you've got quartz in the ground, not only is that death explosion pushing energy out, they can draw energy from the quartz itself to be seen and to interact. Again, like, you know, First Texas, or that's
Right.
not where you want to look.
Well, I know that when I've kind of done a little study on the stories that I have collected in Gettysburg, and only about 10% are visuals. And the visual takes the most energy because to present a full form figure takes a lot of energy rather than whispering in somebody's ear or whatever. And about 10% of my Gettysburg stories are visuals. I started collecting the stories in Fredericksburg, Virginia, another battlefield, for tours that we did down there for a number of years. 25% were visuals. So if that's a random sampling, I was thinking, well, I wonder why. Well, Gettysburg just has a couple small streams, creeks going through it. Fredericksburg has the Rappahannock River, several hundred yards wide, and I mean, water, flowing water. What is a cubic yard is about 1,300, 14, 15, 1,600 pounds. Can you imagine all that moving?
Yeah.
And that represents a lot of energy to be tapped into. So maybe that's why Fredericksburg had more visuals, easier to get the energy. But you're right about the quartz and silver, and so there's something to that. I just haven't been able to put it all together.
Yeah, I was talking to Andrea Perrone, who she and her family moved in a house in the I think it was New England. I may be wrong, but from 1970 to 1980, and that's the family the series The Conjuring was based on.
Right.
And we were talking about this, and she said, "Oh, you know, I never thought of that, because there's actually a river underneath her that was running underneath her house. Like, it was an old prehistoric. It was a water source that was very fast flowing under their farm, or the farmhouse they lived on." So I said, "Yeah, well, that's just like plugging something in. So whatever's in there can be a lot more active."
Yeah, it's definitely a connection. Of course, then the Sachs Covered Bridge, that area is very haunted, and that's where Marsh Creek runs right under Sachs Covered Bridge. And of course, it was a Confederate hospital, and both armies used that bridge. It's the original bridge, and so there's burials out there. There was suffering out there because it was a hospital site. So yeah.
Well, there was a place that I went to there, and I want to say Johnson's Farm, but I doubt that's right. But it was the barn was used as a Confederate field hospital, and the barn still exists on this farm, just about a 15-minute drive out of Gettysburg. And it was interesting because the barn itself, there were still marks on the walls from stuff, and I didn't see anything, but I sure felt a lot. But there was too many people in there to get an EVP, because, you know, you're on there a tour with 20 some other people. But outside, they were talking about, okay, this was, you know, during the Civil War, this was a Confederate field hospital. A lot of people died in here, a lot of energy, and they go on the history of that. And then one of the people said, "Oh, by the way, outside, there were an Indian battlefield here. There was like going back to colonial times and French Indian wars and stuff." And I said, "Oh yeah, this place is crazy. And there's so much energy around here."
Well, since you said that, that's the David Stewart farm.
Stewart, yeah, the Stewart farm.
Yeah, that's when at first I thought you were talking about the Daniel Lady farm, but no, that's the Daniel Stewart or David Stewart farm. And that I've been out there. I've done a lot of investigations out there. The woman who owns it is a friend of mine, and she obviously rents it out to as a B&B. But that barn and the Native American presence there is pretty palpable.
Yeah. Well, you're talking a bit about the and again, because we were talking off air, I can't remember if we mentioned it there or on the show, but there was a river system that the Union Army kind of helped defeat the Confederates.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Rebel River. Yeah.
Yeah. And if you went back to the 1700s, the British used, I think it was called the Champlain Corridor or Highway or something, but it was a river system that they used to come sneak up on the French. Not sneak up, but actually, instead of crossing land and blazing trails, they actually got on the river system, and all that area, the Pennsylvania, Ohio area, and up to what's, I guess, Michigan and that area where it was all coming down from the Great Lakes, all the rivers and the Mississippi, even up in that area. That's how they traversed and basically beat the French back, because they were using the rivers, or the First Nations and the Indians weren't, and the French weren't. They were just head down through the bush.
Right.
So,
well, that's one of the things that I mentioned in the beginning of that book. It's out of print now, but I mentioned that Army's infantry considers rivers barriers. Okay, and if you want to anchor your flank on a river, they can't attack your flank. Navies use them as inroads into the enemy's territory.
Yeah,
and that's what Grant did. He started using the naval tactics, using the rivers to pierce the Confederacy, rather than using them strictly as defensive places.
Yeah, it was smart. Now, what is the Civil War Ghosts out of print? That one too, or is that's one of your first ones, wasn't
it? I have a book called the Civil War Ghost Trails.
Okay, that must be the one.
That's still in print, and that's all the major battlefields of the Civil War I got a chance to visit and write about. So yeah, that's still in print.
And it was Blood and Ghosts was the crime scene one, right?
Correct. Haunted Crime Scenes and Blood and Ghosts are two different volumes.
And now you're like at Ghosts of Gettysburg Volume 5.
No, the next one will be 9.
9. Holy crap.
Yeah.
9. That's good. It keeps on going, and I'm gonna bounce into your store here.
Hey, there we go.
Now these pictures, are these the pictures on the wall here? Are those ones that like some tourists would send you? And
yes,
yeah, with the weird fuzzy thing in the background.
Yeah, and we also have like a rolling slideshow there too of some of these pictures. But yeah, I get pictures all the time from people. One that's not up there, but is in Ghosts of Gettysburg 7, I believe, is the ghost that was seen in that very building that you're in now.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a little boy. And one of my the first time I heard about children in our office is one of our mediums. When we first bought the place, she said, "You're going to be hearing children playing here." And I said, "Well, you mean marbles on the floor? But just put carpeting it." No, she said, "Don't worry, you'll still hear them." And one of my employees saw a little boy, and she described him as probably 4 or 5 years old, dirty blonde hair, white shirt, suspenders, and she saw him right in that room that's behind you there. Fast forward to about 5 years ago, and there was a photographer, and he was part of a ghost hunting group that wanted to investigate the building. And so I knew them, and I said, "Here, take the keys, just lock up when you're done." And he called me the next day. He says, "I think I got a picture that you might be interested in." He had gone into the next room and set his camera up. I mean, they've been hearing things all night, kids playing and laughter. And he set his camera up in the next room and took about 50 pictures into the Civil War section of the building. And he showed me one picture, and there's a image of a little boy that you can see through, dirty blonde hair, white shirt, suspenders. So I think he got the picture of our ghost, and that's in like Ghosts of Gettysburg 7. we put that in there. But at any rate, so our building, and it's also nice, James, because I owning that house, it's like having a laboratory.
Yeah.
Lock it down. One night, I decided I was going to find out if you really needed a human presence to get EVP, and so I put my recorder up in the probably the most active room in the building there, and I set my recorder up and I put it on voice activation. And I left about 11 o'clock. I said, okay, see you tomorrow morning. You hear me say that. And then I came in and announced my presence the next morning, and I picked it up and I looked, and I got 44 minutes of EVP. And it sounds sometimes like there's a party, white noise. Couple of times it was a snowy night, and a couple of times I could hear a snowplow go by, so I could identify what actual noise sounded like, which was good. But I got 44 minutes of random noises. Sometimes there was laughter, sometimes there was growling or shouting. Most of the time it was just kind of like background noise in a party. So that was pretty interesting. But but owning that house is kind of fun. It's a Civil War house. It was there at the time of the battle. So
that is cool.
Very interesting.
It's fascinating to set up just audio and walk away. There's a investigator out of Ontario, Canada here, who, when they get called to a house, they meet, for a coffee beforehand, get an idea of the layout of the house. They've already, done their pre-work, and okay, these are where the rooms are, and this is where the busy part is, or allegedly. And so when they get there, they don't say a word. They walk in, set up all their equipment, turn it on, leave, and go for a coffee. They come back 20 minutes later, and then they start. And what they find is they get a lot of stuff while they're setting stuff up. They'll get two ghosts talking to each other. What are they doing? And one will come in. And so one specific instance he was relating to me, he said there was like a woman who was telling woman ghosts telling the two male ghosts, don't talk to them. Just stay away from them. And the guys, and then they left. And when they came back, just as they were coming back, they've got recordings from inside the house of the two males going, hey, they're back now. What do you want us to do? And the woman saying, no, don't interact with them.
That's a great technique.
And then their entire investigation got nothing. But they could figure out why, because the woman was telling. I did a thing. I went old school in a haunted Veterans Legion here, where it's very, very haunted and a lot of activity behind the bar. And I hung a string up, just a string. And I said, if anybody's here, just would you move the string? It had 3 audio recorders set up, and I was the only male at the place at the time. And very clearly on the recorder, there's a male voice saying, don't touch the string. So it was like one ghost telling the other ghost, don't friggin' interact with these guys.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, come on, move the string, damn it. You don't need much to move a piece of string hanging on a wall.
We have a resident ghost in that house, Mrs. Kitzmiller.
Oh, cool.
Who owned the house longer than anybody. And her whole family virtually died in the house. I think one of her daughters did not. But at any rate, she has been communicating with us virtually since we bought the place. And the upstairs had some crockery and some dishes and things like that. And one of our mediums said, Mrs. Kitzmiller is really upset and she told Carol this. She said, because all that crockery up there is chipped. Carol said, it is not. And she said, well, that's what she's saying. She wants new stuff. So we went in there and started pulling the stuff out. Sure enough, I mean, Carol put it in. She didn't realize that there were cracks on the bottom and chips, and just about every piece was chipped. And one of our mediums said, Mrs. Kitzmiller is not happy because you invite people up here and you don't offer them tea and cookies, which a proper Victorian lady would do to entertain. And Carol finally said, "Okay, that's it." So we had a group up, and she found some cookies somewhere in who knows, it'd been 15 years in the building there, and she sent them. She didn't want anybody to eat them. She sent them down. So I asked Mrs. Kitzmiller on tape, trying to get EVP. I said, "Mrs. Kitzmiller, how did you like the cookies we put out?" And of course, I couldn't hear anything, but then I played it back, and a distinctly female voice saying, "I hate them." So then the next, I mean, there are dozens of stories, but one other interesting story about her. Whenever something's going on in the house, I mean, she's like the matron, but I'm the one that's got to clean up. I'm the one that's got to take care of these psychic problems. And she was upset because, according to one of our mediums, because we have several that we work with, one of them was upstairs. She says, Mrs. Kitzmiller is really upset because there is a little Italian lady upstairs in her kitchen. I said, "Okay,
Really?
why are you telling me this?" She says, "Because Mrs. Kitzmiller wants you to get rid of her." Apparently she followed a group. When we had a group in, she followed somebody there and stayed. I said, "Okay." So I went upstairs, and of course I'm talking to the walls as far as I'm concerned. I said, "Look, it was nice of you to stop by, but you're going to have to leave now because you're upsetting the woman who lives here. So you'll have to leave." Crickets. I'm not hearing anything, but I said, "You got to get out of here." So I went downstairs, and just as I'm coming downstairs, one of our other mediums, a different medium, walks in the front door, and she looks at me, and she's looking outside. She looks at me. She says, "Who's that little Italian lady walking around out there outside?" So I guess it was successful.
Yeah, you got her out the door. Yeah.
The little lady out, so I guess Mrs. Kissmiller's happy. But you own a Civil War house in Gettysburg, and for 20-25 years, get a lot of activity in there.
What year was your house built?
It was built in stages. The very first property assessment there was in 1834, and then it was increased in 1837. So obviously that's the Civil War part. If you remember, there's a balcony section out back. Yeah. That's the Civil War section, and then the front section was built in 1888, and that's when the Kitzmillers owned it. So I call that section that is behind you there the Kitzmiller section.
I'm waiting for Mrs. Kitzmiller to walk past me in the back here, but hasn't done it yet. I found it was really interesting. I think if I ever go back again, I wouldn't stay in the hotel. Just for a couple of reasons. Bloody expensive, and there was so many cool Airbnbs and old houses that you could stay in, and literally you could just get a couple of friends, a couple of couples, and split a house. They're brilliant. And you could sit in the living room and do investigations literally.
Oh, absolutely.
You could do them if there wasn't traffic. You could do it in the middle of the street. It's just such a busy place for dead people.
Well, there's one, I believe it's called Little Round Top Farm. That's right on the back side of Little Round Top. And the woman who owned the Dobbin house purchased it and the land out there. And she rents it out, the whole house, to families. And we've done investigations out there, and it's pretty active. The Balladary Inn is another one that we use because it's got a lot of activity there. I've known at least probably 4 or 5 owners. One was a park ranger when I was a park ranger there, and I remember before all the additions were put on, it's on Hospital Road, which is named after all the Union hospitals that were out there. So you can take a walk at night down the road there, and there's a creek that goes by there, so your water source is there. Take a walk down there and probably get all kinds of activity.
How far is Gettysburg, like the battlefield, from, was it Eisenhower's farm or house?
His
State.
farm is where he retired, is literally adjacent to the battlefield. It's right. In fact, Longstreet's troops used that land to march across and gather together before their assaults on July 2nd.
See, and
So
that would be interesting if I was a ghost, a soldier ghost, and you've got freaking General Eisenhower, President Eisenhower living in the neighborhood. That would be kind of interesting energy. I wonder what his place is like.
well, I collected stories. In the second book I wrote about the Eisenhower farm, and I got most of my stories. I will have footnotes or acknowledgments thanking the sources for the stories. But for that particular story, the Eisenhower farm, there aren't any, because all the stories came from park rangers, and they said, "Look, I'll tell you the story, but don't use my name."
Yeah, yeah.
So, but there's the famous uh, mirrored doors, closet doors that they hear slam, and they go and look, and they haven't changed a bit, haven't moved. They're always open, and somebody said, "Well, it's probably the wind blowing them," and they're like, "Well, no, they're sliding doors, so they can't. The wind doesn't have an effect." One time, a woman that was doing the cleanup after the day, vacuuming and that type of thing. I mean, she periodically will hear footsteps coming across. I mean, she can literally follow them with her eyes as the footsteps come across. The sound of them come across one of the rooms. She had just finished and was kind of getting the willies, so she packed everything up, locked the door, got out to her car, happened to glance up at Mrs. Eisenhower's bedroom window. She saw the curtains part and then close, as if Mrs. Eisenhower was just waiting for her to leave.
Yeah.
And the smell of her perfume, the old 1950s perfume, they have containers of that sitting there. They're empty, but they're sitting there, and they'll hear that and they'll go up and they'll inspect them. Maybe somebody opened one, but they're all closed. So
That's kind of cool.
yeah, well, there, a lot of history when you stop and think about all the visitors that Eisenhower had there. De Gaulle and a number of others. I believe Churchill was. I can't even remember. Lots and lots, and the history of that, plus the Civil War era too.
Yeah. Now, how long was the Battle of Gettysburg?
3 days.
3 days.
July 1st, 2nd, and 3rd, 1863.
I was trying to relate to a friend of mine here who, her experience with war was what she saw on TV. She goes, "Well, yeah, a lot of people died there." And I said, "Yeah, but it wasn't like and again, we're talking about the bones breaking.
Mm-hmm.
It's like when you see somebody die on TV, they get like a bullet in the shoulder and drop. In the Civil War, with those friggin' projectiles, they get a bullet in the shoulder and their shoulder left. Like stuff exploded off of humans, leaving them, screaming. And I can imagine 3 days of screams.
Yeah.
And horrible. The type of wounds you get from that type of ordnance was horrific.
Well, it was soft lead. It was not jacketed. So it would, and going very slowly, about 900 feet per second, and it would flatten. A mini ball was about an ounce, about the size of your thumb, 50 caliber. And it would, a 58 caliber, 58 caliber. So it would go in the size of your thumb and come out the size of your fist, because it would flatten out. And if it hit bone, it would shatter the bone. And the only thing they knew to do back in those days, especially with a high volume of cases, is to amputate.
Yeah. And
they get your arm off in about 8 to 10 minutes. And then artillery, of course, I mean, there are accounts, not to get too graphic, but when a cannon goes off, it makes a cloud of smoke bigger than a house. And they would say when they fired at a group of soldiers coming towards them with canister, which is packed iron and lead balls, Yep. Go out like a big shotgun. That you could see arms and legs and torsos and heads cartwheeling out of the cloud when after they fired. And so talk about PTSD. They didn't. They didn't. But they certainly were affected by it for the rest of their lives.
Well, the other thing too is that we talk about PTSD and the trauma of the living. Well, those that are still there are said to be soldiers. The ghosts of soldiers haven't crossed over because they're still fighting. They don't want to leave their comrade they've been fighting with for 4 years. They're the boys. They're not leaving. I'm not going to go if you're not going to go, and we're going to go. We're going to still do this.
Well, I when I give talks, I talk about reasons why spirits linger at Gettysburg, and one of them is that it's fear of judgment. They're very religious back in those days, and they knew "Thou shalt not kill," and yet here they are, aiming their Springfield musket and pulling the trigger and seeing the guy fall, and so that may be part of the reason why they won't or can't or don't want to move on. Fear of judgment. Comradeship too.
Yeah.
That's and now you have to remember that all, not just the ones who were killed there, but all the soldiers who fought at Gettysburg, and during their lifetimes, they used to return to Gettysburg periodically, whenever there was a reunion or whenever they could, up until the 1938 was the 75th anniversary of the battle. There were 2,000 Civil War soldiers there for the dedication of the Peace Light Memorial. So it was a big deal in their lives. And now it's a lot easier to travel to Gettysburg when you're a ghost.
Mm-hmm.
And if it's one of the most important things in their lifetime, why not?
Yeah, it was, you think of a young man who passed there or even had lived through it. That was 3 days. It's going to affect you.
Oh, yeah.
Forever.
And they never forgot it.
Oh,
you didn't.
Yeah, you could look at it's traumatic enough. My father was in the Second World War, and, he was lucky enough, and I say lucky enough, that he didn't see a lot of things because he was a gunner in a B-25 Mitchell, and they bombed the coast of France in the V1 and V2 excavations and a few things, a few railway crossings and things. But his last mission was D-Day around 11:20 at night, bombing a town called Villers-Bocage, where they assumed it was Panzer's headquarters, but years later it was figured out they were actually 7 or 8 kilometers out of town. My dad suffered from PTSD because he had a buddy of his in a plane beside him, and the plane just got hit by anti-aircraft fire and blew up. Well, and my dad was, during the Second World War, was 18 to 22 years old. And that affected him when he came back. And literally he would take off in the evening, fly over at night and come back. And he had a batman, which cleaned his uniform, made the beds. He had meals. He could go to the pub and go to a movie. That was his World War II, other than, once a week or twice a week flying off on a bombing mission. And he had PTSD. Friggin' compare that to these guys. You talk about the 1st Texas, the volunteers who are barefoot because they don't have supplies. They're all literally kids, or, well, what we would look at as being kids. They were probably matured beyond years back then. And what they had to put up with, what they had to see their comrades go through, what they had to look at coming at them. I can imagine how that affected their brains and how that affected the rest of their lives.
Oh, yeah.
How they lived.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it's phenomenal. It's beyond me. That's like talking to somebody who survived Omaha Beach. Like they can't explain. You can never explain to somebody the trauma unless that person was there with you. So it gets to a point where I'm not even going to try to
Right.
explain it to you because you can't understand. There's no way
No,
you understand it.
no, I've been trying for a long time now. Um, and it still escapes me, first of all, how they ever did what they did. Yeah, I'm just in awe of
Yeah.
somebody who would walk across shoulder to shoulder with your comrades, walk across an open field about a mile and under artillery fire, closing the gaps and attack then a line of Union cannons and infantry behind a stone wall. Pickett's charge, in other words.
Yeah.
I don't know how they did it. I really don't.
Well, you're young and indestructible. Look at us when we were teenagers and the stuff that we used to do. It's
Oh, yeah, yeah,
amazing we're here.
yeah.
But that's why soldiers are like the late teens, because you're indestructible. You're going to take that hill. Okay.
Yeah.
And I'm going to do it because I don't want to let the guys on each side of me down.
Right. That's that seems to be the motivating factor.
Yeah.
And of course, when they came back, it's just interesting to see the difference in generations. The Civil War generations seem to want to have to put up a monument on the battlefield, not so much to themselves, but to their comrades who didn't, who didn't leave the battlefield. World War II, finally, 50 years later, they dedicated, one monument basically in Washington, D.C. to the World War II veterans. And, there wasn't that desire to mark your battlefield in World War II from World War II veterans as there was from the Civil War veterans, but that's just the way they did it back in those days, I guess. Although the Civil War, I think, it's the most monumented war, I think, of our time, of history, much of history, because you don't have a lot of, Waterloo, I've never been there, but they just have that one big mound, I know. You don't have a whole lot of monuments, but Gettysburg, virtually every regimental monument has a flank marker on each side. So, you see two smaller stones. So you can literally, they were put there by the veterans, you can literally go and stand in line where these guys stood, where the monument and the two flank markers are. So.
I couldn't imagine, like, standing on that battlefield with all the different emotions you feel and the energies that are floating around out there. It just looking at it and thinking about the volume of humanity that moved from one side of it to the other, and the death and the the carnage, the actual, and again, going back to what that type of ammunition did to people, it was incredible. In fact, as a policeman, the ammunition that I use in Canada, probably in the US too, in our handguns, was hollow point. You can't use that in war. It's against the Geneva Convention to use hollow point ammunition. And the reason we use it is if it goes into somebody, it expands, and hopefully it doesn't come out them and go to the elementary school down the street.
Right.
Like ball ammunition. And the idea with ball ammunition in war is if I shoot you, it goes through you. You may not die. Hopefully you're wounded. And now it's going to take two more soldiers to get your ass off the field. So you've taken out three people from the battle.
Right. Yeah.
The two guys carrying you and you being wounded.
Yeah.
And back then you were horrifically wounded. Like, hopefully you had your head shot off, because anywhere else you're going to lose a limb. And it was just walking through the museum you guys have there. It really brings home the reality of a battle compared to what you see on television, which obviously they're not going to reenact the reality of that kind of wounds. But when you're going through the museum there and looking at stuff, and like the size of the rounds, or the different calibers, and the type of weapons they had, and then the maps and the closeness of combat, and Yeah, that was a war that needed to end 2 years earlier. Like, my
Yeah,
God.
yeah. Well, they did the statistics are always tough to picture when you're, as we are talking like this, but probably the total number of men that were at Gettysburg were in the 180,000, maybe 190,000. And of those, 51,000 became casualties. That's killed, wounded, and missing. The town of they're all left in and around the town of Gettysburg, some of the farm fields, but many of them came into town, were brought into town. They used up virtually every farm, every public building, every church, and a lot of the private buildings.
Yep.
2,400 citizens of Gettysburg in 1863. In fact, a lot of them left. A lot of the men left, taking their dry goods and their cattle. They headed up north to get away from the Confederate Army. So you had maybe 2,000, maybe a little less, of women, children, and old men, basically, because then the armies left. But they had to take care, and a few nurses and orderlies came in or stayed to take care of that 51,000 casualties. So, I mean, it was a mess. It really, really was a mess in Gettysburg, and no one can figure out how the citizens didn't get sick and die because of the unburied bodies. I mean, it's July.
Yeah.
You got 150 pounds of human being out there multiplied by 8,000, 5,000 dead horses out there at about 1,000 pounds apiece. It's just amazing that no one got sick and died because of the rotting flesh and disease. So.
Yeah, and some of they were paying people to bury the dead, but some of the remains were just shoved into rock crevices. And
the most recent one they found was basically shoved into a crevice out by the railroad cut, and of course there wasn't much. There wasn't anything left, just a few bones and a bit of a uniform. But a lot of them were buried by the locals.
Yeah.
Because their comrades marched away.
Yep. And the locals being like the kids, the women, and the older men.
Well, yeah, and you have a body that's been lying around for 3 or 4 days. You want to get it underground quickly, so you dig a shallow hole, you bury it. You might put a wooden headboard in there. Couple years later, it's grown over, and the cows have knocked over the wooden board, and people come and they say, we're the official people to rebury the soldiers. Where we heard you had one on your property, where is he? And you're like, I'm really not sure. He's maybe 50 yards from here. So a lot of soldiers are still buried at Gettysburg.
Oh yeah, that's why you obviously, because it's also a park. You're not allowed to be digging around there and metal detecting. And
correct.
Yeah, it's I was standing looking. Well, I guess I don't know if they're groundhogs or gopher holes or something, but there was a hole of something that was living underground, and I probably the same one I tripped over, but it was beside a little bush areas on the battlefield, and I'm standing, and it was just a little goat trail, a little path, a cart, not cart, but maybe one of a ranger trail or something. And I looked down at this thing, and I'm staring at it, and it was a rock. And I went, oh crap, is that a bullet round? No, it's not. It's like, if you literally could see them, if you got a varmint digging around and rabbits or whatever digging in the ground and throwing up dirt, it depends what where you happen to be standing. You could find artifacts, because it's just a metal detector. You would go insane on that place. It would just, there's so much just stuff. And then, then obviously human remains every so often being found, but man, oh my, oh my. Yeah. Interesting place is somebody who's interested in the paranormal. Mark. Yeah. It's quite a, it's like, I know once there's a guy out in Hollywood or California and LA his house is extremely haunted, and it's been called Disneyland for the dead because it seems to attract a bunch of dead people. Man, you live in Disneyland for the dead. It's like, it's not the happiest place on earth, but my God, you've got a lot of dead people.
Yeah. Well,
Hanging out.
I always say it's like one large laboratory, one huge laboratory for paranormal exploration or experimentation. Um, you can with a little bit of practice, because to get EVP or to get the dowsing rods to work or whatever, you need to practice a little bit, but
Yeah.
it hardly ever fails here in Gettysburg. So
Yeah, I want to go back. I want to, as soon as the apocalypse is done, I want to head back there and actually have a few more days other than like a weekend to go to a paranormal conference. I'd like to just be able to go and poke around historically because I'm interested in it, and the paranormal side of stuff too.
Yeah.
And when people do go out there, if you guys are interested in knowing more about Ghosts of Gettysburg, well, it's ghostsofgettysburg.com, and you can go to the website and see all about the tours and all about the other stuff and the stuff in the store.
Oh yeah,
behind me.
Yeah.
The
And they can preview my next book, which is called Hidden Haunted Hotspots.
Hidden Haunted Hotspots
At Gettysburg, yeah, because there are a lot of places that aren't in the books, and it's based on people being able to go out and do investigations at these places where there aren't too many other people. But that's on. I actually did a series of blogs, and they can get that at markvnesbitt.wordpress.com, and they can get kind of a preview of that.
Mark V. Nesbitt.
Nesbitt, 2 T's, .wordpress.com.
Press.com. Very cool. Well, thanks, Mark. Thanks for dropping by. I really appreciate you coming in here. Sorry about the glitch somewhere in the video. I guess you had a ghost walkthrough. And I actually want to thank you also for something you had said about why some of these soldiers haven't crossed over. I've always, when I do my talks, people say, why does a dead person not cross over? One of them is that fear of retribution, the religious, I believe I coveted my neighbor's wife, therefore I'm going to go to hell.
Right.
So stay back. That they have unfinished business. Their children, and they literally, it's stranger danger when their great grandmother shows up and says, "You're coming with me, Billy," and you're like, "I have no idea who you are. I'm going to wait for mom and dad," or they don't know they're dead. I've always had those four, but you've added this other one to that list, which kind of goes into the unfinished business portion, but it's camaraderie in not wanting to leave the guy I was with alone. So he's not leaving. Well, I'm not going to leave because we've been together through thick and thin. So you've added a fifth to my four. So I'm going to look into that a little bit more, and I appreciate that. I really do.
No problem.
Yeah, that's a good one. Again, we've been talking to Mark Nesbitt, Nesbitt, out of Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. He is an author. He's an author and a half. He's got tons of books, lots of paranormal. And again, he's like he says, the building he lives in and the building he owns are basically a laboratory for paranormal investigating. And I would recommend going to Gettysburg for a number of reasons. If you're American, you really should go. This is history. This is your history. And it's important to walk away with getting a feel for what happened and what the boys had to go through back in the day, and the women in towns, and how it affected where you are in your life right now. And also, if you're a paranormal buff like I am, my Lord, there's a town that's a laboratory. So get out there and do the tours. And I'm really happy with the app. I'm going to see if I can find that app. And that would be so cool if, unfortunately, if the apocalypse carries on over the summer, which I hope it won't, and there's not a lot of travel. But if that happens, at least get in your car and drive around and listen to it and walk out in the field by yourself and use the app for a tour. So that'd be kind of cool. Mark, thanks again.
James, thank you very much for having me here. We'll do it again sometime.
Yes, please.
Yeah, let me know when you're coming to Gettysburg.
I will. Definitely get there a weekend that you actually are in town, as opposed to the other one.
Okay. Great. Thanks.
That's it. Let's roll. Hey. Let's be careful out there.